Good morning, fellow programmers! Thanks for joining me. I'm T-Pain, and welcome to Let's Learn Python. Feel free to use the skip ahead feature on the right-hand side to jump to any specific sections or examples. Today we'll be using both Python 2.7.6 and Python 3.3.3. You can download those from python.org/downloads. I don't know why they changed the link, but I guess they wanted to mess with me or something. So we will be using MySQL Community Server version 5.6.21, although this should work for most all versions of MySQL. And you can download that from that link, and we'll be using PyQt. You can download from this link. Alright, so today's focus will be on MySQL integration with Python and PyQt. This will be the first in a tool development series of tutorials, and it'll build heavily on past lessons, so feel free to go back and watch them again if anything is unclear. In particular, I'd recommend episode 24, which we covered the basics of PyQt and Python integration. Alright, so databases. What is a database? Well, you've heard of a bass guitar. Well, a database is a guitar that is one octave lower than that. It is so metal, it is the database guitar. Okay, that's a terrible joke. A database is an organized collection of all kinds of data. One way you can think of a database is just like an address book. In an address book, you can store tons of names, and each name can have many phone numbers, a physical address, and multiple email addresses. Each one of those people represents an entry into a database. A database is merely a container for storing all sorts of information. Inside a MySQL database, data is stored in tables. There are various other formats and database languages out there, but today I'm going to be focusing on MySQL, which makes use of tables. So what is a table? Well, I'll show you. Have you ever opened up Microsoft Excel, or if you're cheap like me, OpenOffice's Calc? Well, that pretty much represents what a database and tables are. So in OpenOffice Calc, which is basically an Excel sheet, we have this whole thing is a document. This whole document would represent the database. And down at the bottom, we can actually switch between these different sheets, these different tabs. And each one of these tabs would be a table in the database. And that's pretty much it. Tables are organized into rows and columns, and they're set with an ID at the top. So this column A could be ID, this table B could be somebody's name, this table C could be a social security number, and so on. And each one of these rows would be a field in which we enter like a individual's information, like his name, phone number, address, whatever it is. Again, this is how MySQL organizes its data. Not all databases organize them this way. There are others that organize them in hierarchical or other stuffs. MySQL is a relational database management system, meaning you can manage data just like a regular database system. But it can also have tables of data reference other tables, thus they have relationships between the two. How romantic are relationships after all, really? I mean, they're quite nice. For more info on MySQL, I'm putting a link in the description and to the right to a fellow programmer named Caleb who delves much deeper into the subject. Check him out, he's awesome. Alright, so how do we install MySQL? Well, again, follow the link to the right and it'll lead you to this web page right here. And then you're going to click at the top. The first one right here is called MySQL Community Server. Click on that. It'll lead you to here. And then do their web page design. They actually placed the download link not at the top where you'd expect it, but further down here. And then you can choose whatever platform you wish to download it from. So I'm going to click Windows, scroll down again, and then you're going to see the actual download links again at the bottom. And then you can choose whatever version that you want. Like I choose the small one, and then I just download it using their client. Now, when MySQL installs, you're going to actually have to put in a username and a password for accessing the database. Make note of these because you're going to be using them frequently in the future. I myself chose the username root, and I just stuck with my favorite password. And I installed this on my own local machine, so everything that I reference will be on, the server will be running on this machine. So the IP address that I'll punch in is going to be 127.0.0.1. And also, when you install this, if you have Python already installed on the machine, it'll actually install the connectors for you automatically. The connectors are what's going to allow you to communicate with the database through Python. All right, so how do we use MySQL? Well, I'd like to demo some quick commands for you that you're going to be using fairly frequently. So if you go ahead and open up the MySQL 5.6 command line client, it's going to open this ugly little window right here. And I'm going to go ahead and punch in my password. Okay, and here we are. So first thing I'm going to do is I want to see what databases we actually have for this machine. So I'm just going to type show, lowercase. You can also type these commands uppercase. It makes no difference whatsoever. Capitalization is ignored by MySQL. And then type databases. So show databases and then end it with a semicolon. And type enter. And here it outputs all of the databases I have on this machine. And I'm going to log into my first database right here at the top. So I'm going to go type, now that I can see all the databases, I feel like creating a new database. So I'm going to type create space database space and then whatever I want to title it. I'm going to title mine ham because that's my favorite, and then end it with a semicolon, enter, and it says query OK, and it was created. Awesome. Now next I'm going to access and enter the database. So I'm going to type the command use, and then whatever the database name is, which is ham, and then end it with semicolon, enter, database changed. So we've changed it successfully. Cool. And now if we wish to delete a database, we can type drop and then whatever the name of the database is, along with the table. Other options we have are to select items from a table to actually output what it is, and we can use that by typing the select star. So I'm going to actually start using another database called my first database, db, enter, and just to show you what this command does. So next I'm going to go show tables, semicolon, enter, and it'll show all my tables. And I'm going to go ahead and select everything from the table and just to see what it is. So I'm going to type select space star space from, and then the table name. I'm going to select all from test 7. Let's see what's in there. End it with a semicolon, enter, and it says there was one input, and it says the message was testing. So this is actually spitting out the columns as to what they are. And so the first one is ID, the second one is date, third is time, and the fourth is message. And then after that we have our first entry in the row. Row ID is 1. It says the date, time, the message is testing. And it's as simple as that. Alright, so let's move on to the actual tool demo, the actual thing that I wanted to show to you, the thing that I spent a few hours actually working on to show them the simplest concept of grabbing data from a database and then feeding data into a database as well, using Python and PyQt, doing it all for us. So for the first time ever, I am giving you my source code. And from here on out, I will be giving you more and more of my source code so that you guys can actually play with it and experiment yourselves. The reason being is because we're going to be delving into code that's going to get longer and longer. And as such, it's going to become too difficult, I feel, for you to just rap out like 200 lines of code flawlessly. This is going to be through GitHub with the link on the right, or again, through the link in the description. And we're going to comb line by line as to what I provide you. And so with the link, once you open it, you're going to be sent to this site. And on the right-hand side, on the bottom middle, you're going to actually see download zip. And that's what's going to allow you to download the files. So I'm going to go ahead and comb through the files once you have them downloaded on your machine. And you're going to see a lot of this stuff is stuff you can ignore. For instance, all this stuff right here, you can ignore. This isn't doing anything. The init is just so this can be used as modules. And so these files can communicate with each other or be like reached into. And then we have the convert to Py, which is my a simple like line of code that is calling the PyUIC4 command in the command prompt to convert the UI file to a Python format file. And that's these two files right here. If you open up that in Qt Designer, you're going to actually see this. And this is just our simple user interface. I'm going to go ahead and run it real quick. And this is what we will be actually seeing in the future. I put in a few items in here to actually see what the code will spit out or what it is expecting to input items. This is just for testing purposes. And then I also input steak because I like steak too. It's not ham. Oh my gosh, we got to change that. Ham. There we go. All right. And what I'm expecting you to do in the final examples is to actually duplicate these two items to allow the user to input a database that they want to connect to, or a table that they want to connect to, in the line edit field, and then have a button that says you click it and it'll actually change that for you automatically. The other thing that I am asking in the final challenges is to actually create a combo box. And a combo box is a simple drop-down. You've seen drop-downs everywhere at one point or another. If we run this real quick and you click the drop-down, oops, I got to put in some items real quick. And I'm just click, boom, 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 there. And then if I run it, it'll actually be a drop-down list. And I'm asking you to actually create a simple drop-down list. And then when they click the button, it'll actually record that extra data in an extra column in here. And yeah, just that simple for the challenges. So if we're combing through the files some more, we're actually going to see the main files that we're going to be dealing with is this DB UI main file. And this is the main, this is going to be the UI file that actually connects to the DB manager. So the reason I separated out the code this way into two separate files, the UI stuff should all be in the UI file. It should only ever reach into the manager to start up the manager, and occasionally connect buttons to issue commands to the database manager. But for the most part, the database manager should be the only thing talking to the actual database. Everything should be filtered through the manager. It's important to have this separation of the UI to the commands, so that if you run this manager on its own, you can do that, and you don't need the UI to actually run the commands. Okay, then we have a license and a README file. The README is just like, I can't remember what I wrote, something silly, I think. And then we have the run command, and this is just a lazy man's way of actually like double clicking and then calling Python to run this DB UI main file. I'm really lazy. Anytime I can be lazy and just like have stuff be double clickable, I'm gonna do it. Okay. So enough jib-jab about all this stuff, all the file structures. Let's actually examine the code. So we're going to start off with the database manager. See what's going on underneath the hood. But before we do that, we're actually going to run the code and see what happens. Woo! Hey, here's our tool. So this is a really simple tool. All I wanted to do is be able to add stuff in to the database, which is going to be through this message field right here. And I'm just going to type, I love big ham sandwiches. Because I kind of do. And then click commit, and it'll add it to the database. And it was very quick. You might not have noticed it, but it added it in to the last bit of the list. And yeah, this whole thing updated automatically. And so you can see entries from different dates and stuff, different times, and the messages that I entered in. And if I enter in anything else, like if I enter in a whole bunch of ASDFs, commit that, it'll load in, boom, there it is, and it's displayed. So this is just putting stuff into the database and retrieving stuff from the database back. And that's it. Really simple tool. And yeah, so let's dive into the code. Database manager. What is going on here? The first line is, of course, to make this file executable for Unix and Linux users. The second line is to import MySQL connector. This MySQL connector is what's going to allow us to connect to the database and allow us to do anything with it. After that, we have import the error code from the MySQL connector, and this is just so we can identify different errors that we're getting. Then finally, we have the date and time, so that we can actually register in when the user plugs in a message into the database. So yes, just that simple. After that, we have our actual class for the database utility. So here I have a constructor class. And it's going to be asking for the database that we're going to be logging into and the table name that we're going to be using. So first thing to do is we're going to store those values because we're going to be using them repeatedly. After that, I have a few lines of code here, which are going to open up a file on my desktop. That's my password, which I didn't feel like sharing with you guys. Sorry, I love you, but I can't share you my password. And then it's going to read in my password and feed it into the actual database, so that we can access and manipulate stuff. After that, we have the host, which is going to be the IP address that is for the host, which is my computer. So, of course, that's going to be 127.0.0.1. And the username is root. And that's about it. Should have been Groot, right? Should have been I am Groot. So this was to create the connection that we're going to be using. After we've created the connection, then we need to create the cursor. The cursor is what is going to allow us to send commands to the database to actually execute stuff. The connection is what's establishing the actual connection to the database. So again, cursor equals commands, connection is the connection. Next, we're going to have connect to database, a command that we created right here. And after that, we have create table. So connect to database, that actually attempts to connect to the database by setting the database name. And what this will do is if there is no such database, it'll actually output an error. And so we try to catch that error, and what we'll do is actually create that database if it doesn't exist. And then again, we'll set that database equal to the name that we passed in. Okay? And then we have like a catcher if anything bad happens that we weren't expecting. And the create database is just feeding in our first line of MySQL code. Right here says, and this is on line 36, it says create, or issuing this command called run command. Run command is my own custom function to basically feed in commands to MySQL, because there could be any number of errors and outputs from MySQL, so we want to be able to catch everything, and that's why I wanted to have it like set up this way. So the line that we're feeding in to MySQL is create database, and then we're going to have the name of the database that we want, and then after that we have a way of setting up the defaults for the database, and we're feeding in the name of the database at the end. After that, we have an error catcher if something fails, although we shouldn't really. And we'll see this message right here if we do. And yeah, a minor note for strings: if you put a open close squiggly brackets, you have the opportunity to actually do this dot format in print and with stuff in parentheses to actually do a substitution of this squiggly bracket with the error or whatever you put in the parentheses. I personally am not a big fan of this format. I like the %S. This is just an alternate way to use substitution in strings. Another way you can do is just a plus sign and then whatever the variable is after that. That's a string. And yeah, after that we have create table, and the create table is going to actually attempt to create a table, and that's with the command create space table space, and then we have this strange couple of words right here, if not exists. So saying if the table does not exist, then we're going to go ahead and feed in the rest of the code. Otherwise, we're just going to skip it and stop creating the table. Minor note, another way that you can combine a whole bunch of lines of or a whole bunch of strings together in Python is you can actually use these parentheses on either side, and this way you don't actually have to use the plus sign connecting each of these statements together. It'll actually do it automatically. That's a burp. So after this creation of the table, so after you declare that you're going to be creating a table in MySQL, then you actually need to declare at least the first line of code, which is going to declare the first row type. And so I'm saying, hey, the first row type is going to be ID. The name of it's going to be ID, and the data type is going to be int, and then in parentheses I'm going to put 5. So basically this can go up to about a value of 100,000. Not much beyond that though. And next I'm going to type not null, because you have to pretty much type not null for everything. Just trust me on that one. And then after that I have this weird line that says auto increment. Auto increment says every time there's an entry put in, I'm going to automatically assign the next highest value, or increment by 1. So our first ID is going to be 1. Our next ID is going to be 2, and so on and so forth. It's just going to keep track of it all automatically for us. After that, we're going to say we're going to have a date, and we're going to have it of type date. That is an actual type. And there's also a type called time, which I'm feeding in the time. And again, we're saying that they're not null. And after that, we're going to feed in a message, and it's going to be a character string of 50 characters. No more than that. I'm not expecting anybody to go crazy, and you can have this up to 500 or 5,000, I think. It can go really high. And again, we're setting it to not null. And then after this comes this very important line. After you've declared all your columns, the very last thing you should declare, still within the parentheses of what you're declaring inside the table, is primary key. Now, primary key is basically saying, hey, or how am I going to be organizing the rows within this table? What column am I going to be paying most attention to? And here I have ID as the main organizer, so, or the main key. You could also type in a whole bunch of extra ones if you wanted to, like you could have date in here, and you can have like backups of time or whatever you want. It's not really necessary though for what we're doing. Finally, we have the engine is equal to InnoDB, and this is basically declaring the type of table we're going to be using. After that, we go ahead and use our run command to actually pass that command to MySQL. And again, we'll be covering that in just a minute. Get table is our way of fetching stuff from a table, fetching a whole bunch of data. And when we actually do get stuff from a table, it's going to come in the stream of tuples. And I'll explain that in just a minute. And the command that we're going to be feeding into it is just select star from, and then whatever our table name is, followed by an end semicolon. Okay? And after that, we have get columns as another option, and that's what we're going to be using in our tool to actually name the tops of this header right here inside this tree view widget. That's how we name all these things. And then following that, we have the actual run command. Now, what's going on inside here? First thing I did is just say, hey, here's the command I'm trying to run, in case we got any errors. Then I try to execute the command, and the way we do that is self.cursor.execute, and we're just feeding in the command right there. Now, if there's any errors, we're going to output the errors with whatever message it was, and I just put in these just to be precautious. After that, we're going to feed in these very odd lines of code right here, and this says try, and then we're trying to actually issue this command to the cursor and say fetch all. What fetch all is doing is it's trying to retrieve any output data from MySQL. It's all being stored in the cursor. And so fetch all is going to say, hey, grab everything. The problem with this fetch all is that if there is no output from it, then it'll actually output an error. So that's why we have this following line where it just say, hey, just fetch one. And this will actually set the message to be none, or I think of none type. And then it'll just return it. So if we really wanted to, we could actually type none in here, and it'd do the exact same thing. But I just left it in there because I don't care that much. All right. And then after that, we have add entry to table. So this is our way of passing stuff into the table, or passing stuff into MySQL. And the way we do that is first we grab the date and time of when we're issuing this command, the message that we're going to be feeding in, and then we combine it into a single command. And that is with insert into, and then whatever our table name is, followed by the actual stuff that we're going to be, or the actual columns we're going to be inserting them into. And so first column that we're going to be inserting is called date, second column is going to be time, and the next one is going to be called message. So this is identifying what values are going to be assigned to what columns. Again, so yeah. Next, we actually say values. So again, that's insert into whatever the table is, these columns, and then these values are going to be inserted in there. And again, this is all going to be one line of code. And then finally, we run that command. Perfect. And then after that, we have a guy that we haven't used very much, a deconstructor named __del__. And so this is going to be called when the class is actually destroyed, or basically when the program ends. And so this is going to be say, hey, the connection, let's just go ahead and commit all the changes that we made to the database, and so they'll actually be stored. And then finally we say cursor.close and connection close. And this is just a little cleanup code. If we don't have this line for commit, then it may not actually be stored in the database. Okay, and then at the very end, we have a bit of code to test this code within the file. So since we're going to be actually using this code from the UI file, all this code will be ignored. But this was just like setting it up for testing purposes. It's always important to test your code. And this is why I love this one command. If the name is equal to main, then it'll run this. If not, then it will ignore it. So let's jump over to our UI code now. Up top, we've got our PyQt code, our import code for Qt Core and Qt GUI. After that, we import our database manager, the other file we have, and we also import sys. And this sys is so that we can actually run the program on our OS system. So for me, it's going to be Windows. On Mac users, it's going to be Mac, etc. So after this is the boilerplate code that is always created whenever we convert a UI file to a Python file. And for the most part, I don't touch it at all. I just leave it as is. So let's scroll on down past it. Next, we have the UI Python MySQL tool class created. And I changed this. This was initially object. I changed that to a Q widget so that it'll actually work. And then I created the constructor class right here. And here we ask for the database name and the table name we're going to be using so that we can actually pass those into the database manager below. And then we're being sure to store an instance of the database manager right here in DBU. I named it DBU for database utility. You could name it whatever. After that, I actually run the setup UI. And after all of that, at the very end of the constructor, I call update tree. And this is to update the tree widget, which is going to display all our outputs from the database. And then after this, we have setup UI. I actually deleted a whole bunch of, a few lines of code from here. These were just extraneous stuff that weren't really doing anything. Scrolling on past the setup file, we actually have the retranslate UI, and again I deleted some more code just to delete extra stuff that wasn't doing anything. Yeah, so now we get to our actual connection to the database utility with these few lines of code. So this line 66 through 84, this is what's doing all the action. So first line we have is Qt core PySignature, and then it says on the commit button being clicked, we're going to actually execute this function called commit. And first thing it's going to do is it's going to grab the text from the line edit. We're going to feed that into the function called add entry to table. And then we're just going to update the tree. And that's it. That's what our button does. It keeps it very simple. And the update tree is saying, hey, let's go ahead and get all the columns, so that we can name the header properly. Then let's get all the data from the tables, or from the table. And then we're just going to go through and we're going to rename the header of the tree widget. We're going to clear out all the items. And then we're just going to feed them in line by line. And we're going to feed them in one item at a time. So when this tree widget is actually being updated, you've got to update, if I run it real quick, you've got to edit each individual field at a time. So it goes edit the ID, then the time, or then the date, then the time, then the message for each individual item. So it updates pretty quickly though. And then at the bottom, I just say feed in a database name, a table name, open the application and say, hey, when it's closed, go ahead and exit. And it's just that simple. The UI stuff is kept to a very, very minimal amount of code because it's just issuing a few commands, a few very specific commands to the actual database manager, which is doing all the work. So why use databases? Databases are very efficient at storing, retrieving, and manipulating large amounts of data. MySQL is one of the world's most popular and powerful database systems out there. On top of all that, it's free to use, and it's one more thing you can add to your resume. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Great job keeping up. Definitely take a few minutes to investigate these final challenges as you are a brilliant programmer. I'm sure you can do it if you set your mind to it. I will not be posting solutions to these challenges because I really want you to develop your own skills and your own solutions. There's not always a right answer. Please leave me a comment below if this helped you at all. And please do me a huge favor and subscribe to my channel. It would really mean a lot to me. Also hit the like button if you want to show some love. And thank you so much for your support. And as always, keep the dream alive.